Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Dr. Brennan is from Guilderland. He's going to tell us about his book, This Vet Has Tales. He's been a veterinarian for what, 40-something years, 50? 50, all right, he's in the 50s. He graduated from Cornell in 1952. He served in the Air Force for a couple years. His wife is here, Mary, also graduated from Cornell. They have 3 children, 6 grandchildren. Dr. Brennan, he started the Guilderland Animal Hospital in 1955?
Correct.
That's still in business, right?
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay, they're still going strong.
I hope so.
He was also the Albany County vet for 20-something years. He worked at the racetrack for 3 years, both the flat track and the harness. So he's got, I'm surprised the book isn't thicker. He's probably got a million stories. So he's going to tell us about his book, and a little bit different today. He's going to sit. So please enjoy. So Dr. Brennan,
Thank you.
just take this. You want to just hold this?
Yeah.
You should be able to
Thank you, Joe.
have a seat there.
Most of you in the audience are my generation, so you'll excuse me. I do better when I sit. And so here we go. Can you all hear?
Is that?
Okay. Why are we all here? Because we're not all there. Now, that's Irish philosophy. I think what you'll find today is that I'm going to talk naturally about my book and share with you some of the history of our community. We came here in 1955. And I'm sure some of you go back that far, but the book is it's a lot of stories that date from 55, and they're mostly about animals. Some couple that don't contain animal stories, but they're stories that will stimulate you to think and refresh your memories about what we have lived through in this last half century or more. Let me share with you the fact that Fuller Road was a dirt road in places when we moved here. That's amazing. It's amazing. There was no Corner Road. Corner Road to connect Route 20 to Central Avenue didn't exist. You had to hike. Wolf Road was 2 lanes. Colonie Center, I vaccinated pigs where Colonie Center is now. Specifically where Macy's is located, there was a large hog farm there. Colonie Country Club, that's now Sears. And right next to our airport here, the Engle Farm, I treated workhorses there. It's amazing to me to see the big jets come in and remember how I treated these Belgian horses that the old Mr. Engle used to cultivate his vegetables. Crossgates Mall was a horse stable. Do any of you remember St. Coleman's Home? St. Coleman's Home is over between Watervliet and Cohoes and Latham. And it used to be a home for delinquent or orphaned or children that didn't have a regular family home. And they had a wonderful herd of Guernsey cows that I took care of. A fellow by the name of Belknap was in charge, and he and I got along very well. SUNY Albany was the Albany Country Club. And telephones, do you remember? Any of you lived in Schenectady, to call Albany was a long distance call. when Mary and I first started our practice, we had to have 2 phones because we really didn't want the clients to have to make a long distance call. So we had one for each town. And the winters. Now, we just came through a snowstorm, but nothing like it used to be. Don't I sound old? Oh, well, and there was no throughway, no Northway. Traffic on Route 9 and Central Avenue, Route 5. Boy, that was tremendous. But to the point, now, why This Vet Has Tails? Why did you write the book? Well, I was urged by my wife and my children constantly. My kids used to ride with me, and they say after treating a cow or a horse or seeing a dog or something, Dad, you ought to write that up. That'd make a good story in a book. You can't play golf in December here in this country. And actually, I was a little jealous when I retired. I was jealous of a colleague of mine, Dr. Robert Link in Delmar Animal Hospital. Bob was an excellent veterinarian, and he retired and he took up painting. And his watercolors are magnificent. He exhibits at banks and so forth. And I don't have a talent like that. I guess the Irish have the gift of gab, so I put the gab onto paper, and that's how I cope with Bob Link, my good buddy. I wrote the book about 3 or 4 years ago, not steady, spurts here and there, kept it a secret from everybody until I was sure that I was going to have a product, and then to get it published. I wrote it at home, I wrote it in the Guilderland Library, I wrote it on airplanes, I wrote it on a beach, I wrote it longhand. I wasn't smart enough to learn how to use Word, so I had to pay a young woman who was very kind and very cooperative to type my hand scratchings onto readable type. But it was fun. How has it been received is a question people ask. How do people, you don't hear the bad news, but most people seem to like it. I got great newspaper coverage. As you may have read, the Altamont Enterprise and the Saratogian, the Gazette, the Troy Record. But there's a building next door here that if anybody can crack that ice, I give them credit. They won't give me a line in their paper, but I'm doing all right. The book is a little bit about me, a lot about me, my autobiography. I wanted to leave a story, a legacy for my children and grandkids. I go back into the history of my family, how I got interested in animals, and it must be somewhat genetic. My great-great-grandfather was born in Valatia, New York, and he emigrated to New York City, and he started a livery stable in Greenwich Village. And if it wasn't for the New York Central wiping him out at the turn of the century, the previous century, may still be there. But they took his 3 big brownstones and made a railroad spur out of it. So it kind of took his life away. Big mystery is, how do you get this thing published? Oh boy, what a chore that is in these days. I wrote to about 8 different publishing houses, and I got 3 answers. And it was almost like the same person wrote the answer for each firm. We do not deal with authors. Please have your agent contact me. Oh, okay, so back to the library, and they have this thick book that lists all the agents. And so you go and pick out an agent who deals with animal stories and so on and so forth. Well, almost a mirror image. I picked out the number 8, wrote to them, 3 answers. We'd love to handle your book, but please first give us a list of all the other books you've published. Duh. Catch-22. So in my cups, I happen to relate my saga to my daughter's father-in-law, a very good friend of mine who is an attorney, and he has written attorney texts. And he says, Jack, come on, let's go get a cup of coffee, and I'll take you to the solution to your problem. So here he goes, and he takes me to the corner of Fuller Road and Railroad Avenue. I never knew anything like this existed. Go in, and it's a book printing house. And introduces me to his friend who owns the business. And I start telling him what I want. And he said, no. Kate, and he calls over Kate, who is probably about 28, 32. Little girl comes over, and she says, can I help you? And boy, did she ever. If I said, yes, Kate, I'd like this 3 weeks from now, she said, why not tomorrow? Oh, she was just that wonderful. So Copy Inks, they took care of me. Illustrations in the book, and the book's cover is an interesting story. I have a very good friend, lives in the Adirondacks. He and his wife are illustrators and museum designers and so forth. They are responsible for the Racing Museum in Saratoga, the Dance Museum in Saratoga, and they did a big truck museum in Allentown, Pennsylvania. They've done work over in Stockbridge and Norman Rockwell Museum. Well, at any rate, Steve and I had an agreement that when time came, he'd do illustrations for me. So we met. I presented him with a few things that I wanted, and then we met again about 2 weeks later, and he said, Jack, I've got bad news for you. I said, what's up? He said, I can't do it for you. He said, you can't pay me enough that Clarkson University has got Kevin, his wife, and me hooked up for the next year and a half. And he said, I won't charge you what they are going to pay me, but I'll help you get another illustrator. Okay. So we go on the internet, and you can get illustrators from the Philippines, from India, from all over the world. And so we lined up a few, and I answered the emails. But I got to thinking, you know, it's not the way I operate. I like to be one-on-one. And you know how the light bulbs in the comic strips light up? One day I got up and I said, SUNY Albany, they have a great art department. And I know Joanne Liu, who was the master sergeant of that department. So I called up Joanne and I said, Joanne, I need an illustrator for my book. Oh, you wrote a book? Yes. I don't know. I'll think about it. Well, the next day, got a call from this Jeffrey Wright Saddam, who said, I'm a trained artist, but I don't do much artwork. I work for the department, but I'd like to try to work with you for your book. We met at the Gildan Library, and it was just like a long-lost brother came home. We have a great relationship, and if you've seen the book, if you do see it, you'll appreciate it. He is a great artist, and he's did a great job for me. Oh, let me go back and say the cover, this vet has tails. You can see all the tails of the animals are reaching back to me in the center. Well, that was designed by Jeffrey Wright Saddam, and he did it in black and white. And when I showed it to Kate Boggs at Copy Inks, Kate said, it's clever, but it won't do. I said, well, what are you going to do with it? She said, come back in a half an hour, go get a cup of coffee. And then she had it colored the way it is, and it's much more attractive than just black and white. So I've been blessed with very, very cooperative, good people to help me put this thing together. A fellow by the name of John Rowan. You may have seen John's book reviews in the Gazette and the Times-Union. He acted as my editor. He's a Guilderland resident and just a delightful young man. And we sat for many, many, many hours going over and over and over to the point where I said, John, it's going to print. I don't care what it is, it's going on print. And we did that, and after the first 500 were printed, my daughter came back and said, Dad, you missed this one chapter. It's full of errors. I said, well, full of errors? Well, she said, you spelled tuberculosis correctly first and then incorrectly second. So at any rate, the next group of printings are correct. Let's see. I want to read you a couple of stories. I like to write. I discovered I like to write. It's enjoyable. It's amazing what comes back to you when you start thinking about a subject. So I want to read to you a couple of short stories that are not in the book. It'll kind of give you an idea of how I write and what I like to do. So here you go. First one is called Early Memories. Okay. All right, sit right down, sit back, relax. I want you to close your eyes and concentrate. Now don't do it really, because I want to keep you awake. Think back as far as you can to your childhood. Think back to your first conscious memory, the first event that you can recall. Bring to mind a few of your earliest memories. It'll be great fun. But now, since I am the author of this little ditty, you'll have to listen to some of my earliest memories because I haven't given you this page or pen. I came directly to a second-floor apartment of the 5-story apartment building at 176th Street and Anthony Avenue, Bronx, New York, from the maternity hospital on Fordham Road. Of course, I don't remember the trip, but I do remember the apartment. Each floor of the building had a common landing with 4 doors that were entrances for rather spacious apartments. The common landing was serviced by a wide stairway. Of course, this 1920s building had no elevator, so the residents of apartments on floor 3, 4, and 5 were hearty, healthy souls who rationed their treks to and fro. I remember my mother had installed long, frilly, possibly lace curtains. After all, we were Irish, on the living room windows. I, for some unknown reason, would tear off a piece of the curtain and waddle back through the apartment, making some childish verbal announcement of pleasure, seeking my mother to present her with my gift. I was 3+. This I can offer as my excuse for this childish, idiotic action. My paternal grandfather had a generous mustache, and his favorite chair in our living room often supported him with me in his lap as he nuzzled me with his luxurious facial hair. 3-year-olds really don't appreciate this type of affection. The dumbwaiter in our apartment kitchen fascinated this 4-year-old. It often produced groceries and ice and magically took away trash. At one time, I attempted to make it my own private elevator, but was thwarted by my ever-alert protective mother. My most vivid memory of my apartment life was when I threatened to leave it forever. As most all children at one time or another, I became angry with my mother and father. This seething anger culminated into a verbal threat one day as a 5-year-old announced to his mother, "I'm going to run away from home." I must have preceded this pronouncement with enough mischief and annoying behavior that when I repeated the ultimate threat, my exasperated mother retorted, "Okay, but you're going to go just the way you came to us." So saying, she proceeded to completely undress me down to my birthday suit. My 5-year-old mind didn't quite react to what was happening until I was ushered out through the steel apartment door out onto the second-floor landing, stark naked. All of a sudden, reality set in, tears flowed, verbal cries of dismay, despair, sorrow, embarrassment were mixed with pledges of obedience. And as I begged for forgiveness and mercy, I scratched ferociously on the apartment steel door. I'll bet the gouges are still visible on that metal door if the building still stands. Finally, after an hour or two, No, really, only a few seconds. In reality, the door opened, and I was tearfully engulfed into the arms of my tearful mother. We shared hugs, tears, pledges of love, contrition and obedience forever. Forevermore, the cleverness and ingenuity of my mother was noted by her 5-year-old till this very day. I never did threaten to leave that loving home again, but I often remember and relish those loving arms that welcomed me back into that haven of love. Okay, now this is a little different. It's called Will We Ever Learn? Many years back, my parents had good friends named Schild. Anna and Max Schild emigrated to America from Germany shortly after World War I. Max was a skilled sausage maker, and after a year or two working in the industry in Brooklyn, he and Anna started their own business in the Bronx, New York City. Of course, with German skill, ingenuity, and work ethic, they succeeded. My mother met Anna playing in a ladies' bridge group in the mid-30s. They became good friends, and then, of course, introduced their husbands. The male match was not an instant success. The thick, accented German did not appreciate uniforms, especially an Irish-American policeman. But in time, they both began to recognize the good in each other, and toleration eased into a friendship. Not a deep, unrestricted friendship, but a respectful friendship at least. The Schills' business success enabled them to purchase a summer cottage on a small lake about 60 miles north of New York City. My parents and I were their guests on a beautiful summer day, and they, my parents, were smitten, hooked, and raptured. Within a year, we too had a place on the lake. Not quite as grand as our friends, but it was a start. Anna and Max were blessed with a son. They named him Edward. He had been conceived in Germany, but born in America. Anna always claimed she had seasickness and morning sickness together, easier that way. Their daughter Mildred came along a few years after Eddie. Eddie worked in his father's shop as a youngster, through high school, and part-time while he attended New York University. Mildred learned the management side of the business. As the dark clouds of controversy swept over Europe in the late 30s, I can remember the anguish expressed by Mr. Schild, Max, as he and my father would sit on his lakefront porch having a beer. Max still had many family members in Germany, and he was fearful for them. Ach, Brennan, he always addressed my dad and most others by their last names. Ach, Brennan, what can I do? Not again, war. This expression always led into a frustrating, non-productive conversation. What could a sausage maker and a cop do about the international trouble? Within a year or two, anguish and frustration turned into fear and terror as America entered World War II and Eddie became a U.S. soldier. As an adult now, I can appreciate the turmoil that the Schild family experienced, especially when Captain Edward Schild took his artillery battalion overseas to France and on into Germany. Ach, Brennan, he'll be killing his relatives. I can remember my dad saying to my mom later, sure hope his relatives don't kill him. They didn't. Eddie survived and returned home after the war. He eventually took over the operation of the business when Max semi-retired. My family always chuckled when they talked of the Schild children. They both married Irishers, according to Max. But of course, he and Anna loved their grandchildren dearly. My parents and the Schills are gone, so is Eddie. Mildred Mulvaney sold the business long ago and is now a great-grandmother. She lost a son in Vietnam and a grandson in Iraq. War is hell. Will we ever learn? So, now it's time for me to get into some of the book stories. And I will read you the first story I ever wrote. It's entitled Reptiles and Heroes. By the way, if any of you have to leave, that's fine. I understand. But I'm here to stay as long as you want questions and answers afterwards. Reptiles and Heroes. Daddy, Daddy, my 8-year-old daughter, the apple of my eye, is calling to me as she runs toward our house after exiting from her school bus. Daddy, Daddy. She knew I was home because she had spotted my practice car in the yard. I had just showered and changed after a few hours of work with cows in the large herd of one of my better farm clients. Mary Ann, my daughter, ran into me, gave me a tight hug. Daddy, Daddy, Nancy's mother's iguana is sick. Will you help? Well, in rapid order, my emotions went from the depths of, oh no, the iguana, to, but I'm her hero. Now, I don't lead campaigns against lizards or exotics, but they don't head the list of my favorite patients. Back in the dark ages when I went through veterinary college, our faculty instructors never gave a thought to exotic medicine. But who else has any better knowledge to help these creatures? 'Twas time to apply basic anatomy, physiology, and all the animal medical skills used on the regular domestic pets and farm animals to these special creatures of our world. 'Twas time to be a hero, the hero that Mary Ann knew me to be. Sure, Honey Bunch, what's the problem? Well, he's red and bleeding on his tummy. Won't you come? Won't you come see him? Nancy says her mother is home now, and we can go see him. Can't we? Can't we? Right now? Well, an 8-year-old doesn't deal with appointments and extensive schedules. To her, the problem demanded right now. A glance at my watch gave a tiny window for me to be hero daddy. So sure, let's go right away. Tell Mommy we'll be gone just a few minutes. Tell her where we're going. Luckily, Nancy lived less than a mile away. She was Mary Ann's best friend, and we'd often made this trip. I knew Mrs. Davis had a pet iguana. There's a thing for you. I'd often seen it perched on the sewing machine by the window. Oh, darn it, why hadn't I brushed up on reptile diseases, as I had often thought to myself I should do? It would have been a smart idea. No matter, on to the fray. Mrs. Davis was behind Nancy as she opened the door. You've come to see Arthur. I smiled and affirmed an answer. The two 8-year-olds were racing into the room on the south side of the house where Arthur was usually to be found perched on the sewing machine, basking in the sunshine as it flooded through the large window. The two little girls were already pointing in chorus, see, see, see. Arthur was somnolent, with the exception of blinking eyes. He was an iguana pale green, with the exception of a nasty reddish area on his abdomen. The lesion I observed was within range of his left hind leg and claws. He had scratched it raw. Mrs. Davis donned some garden work gloves and, cooing to Arthur, tried to roll him on his side to present the entire lesion to me. Arthur was obviously unhappy with this procedure, and I immediately cautioned Mrs. Davis to please leave him as is. I've seen enough. I usually don't make snap diagnosis, but in this case, a quick conclusion to our examination was a necessity. I had concluded Arthur had an itch, and his response worsened his problem. Most all animals do the same. What causes itch? Well, a skin scraping and a microscopic exam of it would perhaps provide a more scientific, accurate diagnosis. But this case called for simplicity. It was probably a fungal or bacterial dermatitis, made worse by Arthur's response to the itch. As Mrs. Davis released Arthur, he resumed his preferred pose in the sunshine. Too bad the sunshine couldn't get to the lesion on his abdomen. It might have worked a cure. The two little girls had already gone elsewhere in their house. Their giggles revealed their location. I outlined my thoughts about Arthur's problem to Mrs. Davis and inquired whether she would be able to apply a simple treatment. She pluckily replied, "I'll try." I had in mind swabbing the lesion and surrounding tissue with a tamed iodine solution from which the sting had been removed. It was a product we often used pre-op before surgery to eliminate bacterial and fungal contaminants at surgical sites. It would leave no residue, and if Arthur happened to consume any of it by licking, it would not harm him. "Please, Mrs. Davis, stop at the hospital, my animal hospital, and I'll have the medicine waiting for you in about an hour." Arthur resumed his somnolent sunbath. I made my way to the front door and had it open as two little girls rushed to the outside. Mrs. Davis inquired about a fee for my visit, and I quickly explained she would pay for the medication, but daddies, who would be heroes, never accept money for their heroic deeds. Mrs. Davis smiled her understanding. We later enjoyed some of her special cookies, but I was totally paid for my services as we slid into the front seat of our car, and Mary Ann snuggled beside me and looked up at me, her hero, and said, "Thanks, Daddy." P.S. Mrs. Davis was able to apply the medication, and Arthur's lesion soon healed. P.P.S. A few weeks later, Arthur was found ensconced in a soft chair with three roundish white objects that one would conclude to be eggs. From that day on, Arthur became Amanda. Now, Joe, what time am I to conclude? Well, I can read another story, or I can take questions and answers. What would you like? No, one more story. Okay. Okay, this is appropriate for the season. It's called Porcupine Christmas. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the hospital, not a creature was stirring except loyal Elsie McClellan, our devoted receptionist, telephone answer person, and sympathetic co-worker to all our staff. Oh yes, I was there too, trying to finish up and get home for a family festive Noel. We had had a very busy day, and as Elsie locked the front doors and called the answering service, she turned and exclaimed, "Phew, what a busy day. Merry Christmas, Doc. You're on call. All you need to complete your day is a porcupine tonight." "Merry Christmas to you, Elsie. Thanks for all you do for the practice. Have a happy holiday." "Not to worry. The porcupines are all snuggled up for the season. They and their quills are a fall and spring problem." And off we went to our homes. Yeah, right. 30 minutes later, the dreaded telephone rang. "Dr. Brennan, Mr. Flutie says his dog tangled with a porcupine." Of course, I knew the final word without the operator saying it, porcupine. "His number is 355-7742, and as I jotted it down, self-pity flooded my brain. But thankfully, it was suppressed by concern for the suffering pooch. I called Mr. Flutie and got Mrs. Flutie on the line with a message from me that her husband was already en route. Well, I was pleased that the Fluties had confidence that I would be available to help their pet. So back to the hospital I did trek to await Mr. Flutie and the secondary bearer of the quills. Now, dogs don't get quills without trying to victimize porcupines. Porkies don't throw or shoot their quills. The quills are transferred to the aggressor, perpetrator of the attack, as he tries to bite, scratch, or maim his victim. Most porcupines survive canine attacks, and most canines survive the incident with the aid of quill pullers. The perpetrating attackers are relieved of their acquired quills while they are soundly sleeping, having been placed under anesthesia by veterinarians. Mr. Flutie arrived with Toto on a leash, thankfully. Toto was a large boxer type, but he could pass for a pincushion tonight. A rather loaded pincushion, I'd say. We marched back to the treatment room, trying to keep Toto on the leash at arm's length away from us. We didn't want to acquire any of Toto's quills. Mr. Flutie, you're my assistant tonight. You're going to have to hold Toto while I inject this short-acting anesthesia and then help me intubate, that's place a tube in his windpipe through which oxygen and anesthesia can be administered. You're going to help me intubate him so we can keep him safely asleep until we remove all the quills. Oh, okay, Doc, I'll try, but how can I hold his head with all those quills? Ah, the old towel trick. A towel around the neck and over the head. And Mr. Flutie was willing to help his dog, and he was a quick learner. Soon I had eased a needle into Toto's foreleg into a moderate-sized vein. Doesn't he feel that, Doc? Sure, but he has a few hundred other needles that he's more worried about, I answered. The injection took almost immediate effect. Toto sunk down to a lying position on the table. With Mr. Flutie's aid, I intubated Toto's windpipe, the sleeping pooch, and hooked him up to an anesthetic machine. I proceeded to remove the needle from his arm. Mr. Flutie started. Won't he wake up? No, we've got him on gas. He'll sleep until we turn it off. Let's get to work. I got 2 shallow dishes, filled them with water, and placed them near Toto's head. Then I gave Mr. Flutie a pair of forceps and took a pair myself and said to Mr. Flutie, watch. I grabbed an embedded quill close to Toto's skin, and with a quick jerk, the quill came out of Toto. Immersing the tip of the forceps in the dish of water, I released the quill, and voila, on to quill number 2. After about half a dozen, I said to Mr. Flutie, you ready to try? Cautiously, very deliberately, he tried to mimic my procedures. He, of course, broke the quill on his first try. I was able to grasp the base and remove it. It's best if the direction of your quick pull parallels the entry path of the quill. Mr. Flutie tried again. He smiled with a success. The quill removing procedure goes quicker, of course, with 2 pullers. So after 3/4 of an hour, Toto began to look like a dog again. Excuse me. I examined his tongue, inner cheeks, roof of his mouth. No quills left. Mr. Flutie and I had done a good job. I'll give him an injection of penicillin to combat infection. Usually we don't see any problems after removing the quills, but Toto will probably be a bit sensitive around his mouth and face for a while. I checked Toto's ears and paws. Sometimes quills are found there too. Satisfied that we had removed them all, I turned off the anesthetic. Mr. Flutie was mumbling numbers as he attempted to count the quills. 247, 248. Wow, I'm only half done counting my dish, said Mr. Flutie. I chuckled. We've had many cases with many more than that. What now, Mr. Flutie, said Mr. Flutie. Well, as soon as Toto starts to wake up, we'll remove the tracheal tube, and then soon he'll try to get up. Please hold him, cuddle him until I tell you to help him to the floor. He'll be groggy, but he'll walk out to the car and home to Christmas Eve. By golly, it's almost a miracle. Thanks so much, Doc, for helping Toto tonight. I hope you and your family have a wonderful Christmas and a great New Year. Please send me your bill as soon as possible. It wasn't too long before Toto gained his footing, and dog and master retired to their car and home. I cleaned up and was heading for the door when our inside private telephone rang. As I put the receiver to my ear, I heard Mary, my wife, say, "You're not going to believe it, but you've got another porcupine case coming in. Elsie must be clairvoyant. Gosh, I hope the kids are okay, me not being there with you all. They're okay. They've opened their stockings and have already named this the Porcupine Christmas. P.S. I often saved the porcupine quills from our practice and gave them to a friend who in turn passed them on to Navajo Indians in our Southwest. They use the quills for decoration and designs in their baskets and jewelry. Who knows? You may have some of those beautiful artifacts. You may have purchased them from Lillian Samuel's Indian shop in Guilderland. Toto's secondhand quills, courtesy of the Guilderland Animal Hospital. Okay. So you've heard my stories, and there are probably about 40 more, some of my philosophy and some of my interesting stories. Some of them aren't funny, some of them are sad, but they reflect the life that we do lead. So, questions? Anybody? Please. This is usually the best part.
In your article out there, you talk how your attitudes have changed toward euthanasia. Can you talk about that?
Oh, yeah, that's, well, back again in the dark ages when I became a veterinarian, well, they still teach people how to euthanize animals. And that was a matter of fact, routine job. You know, that's when an office visit was anywhere from $3 to $5, and if you charge $7, put him to sleep, doc. And they'd walk away, and that's what you'd do. Well, after a while, you know, you get a little older, and life tells its story, and you question, am I really doing the right thing? If the creature was vicious, or if the creature had incurable disease or something, perhaps you're doing the right thing. But for a helpless, poor creature who just didn't fit into somebody's lifestyle, that got to us. And of course, then people were beginning to advocate for animal rights. And all of these things put together, it made the last few years, last decade or so of my life as a veterinarian, practicing veterinarian, very, very difficult to put some creatures to sleep. But it's a veterinarian's job, so we must accept that. So, anything else? Yes, sir.
Is there any law against that? If a person brings an animal in that's perfectly healthy and just doesn't fit its lifestyle?
I don't know of any law against it, but certainly the younger veterinarians and our animal rights people have led the fight, and most veterinarians spend time, 5 minutes, an hour, or even refuse to put these animals to sleep now. So it isn't as casual as it used to be. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering, have you ever had any contact with the Best Friends Animal Sanctuary in Utah?
No, ma'am.
I just wondering if you'd ever, they're very focused on no-kill sheltering.
Well, I'm not sure that I believe in no-kill sheltering, but I certainly believe in examining each case for its merits. Any questions? Yes, sir?
Have you ever noticed anything in regard to inbreeding of dogs? Like, for instance, I've owned 3 shepherds, and I see sometimes that these shepherds for sale are dragging their back legs. And I'm wondering, is that through inbreeding, or is that just hip dysplasia? Because I know Cornell does that operation. My daughter had that done. And the results were fairly good, surprisingly. I didn't think, you know, it would be that effective, but it was. But I mean, when are you seeing things like with Dobermans, Shepherds, and Boxers and whatever, where there seems to be some inbreeding taking place that concerns you as a vet, let's say, in any particular breed?
Well, it's a big question. Let me give you a few answers. First of all, there are certain breeds that seem to have more incidences of hip dysplasia than others. And it's an enigma that it's confusion, because Great Pyrenees, St. Bernards, German Shepherds seem to have much more than the standard number that you would think. Dobermans don't. Don't know why. I can't answer you specifically about inbreeding and genetics, but the Veterinary College of Cornell and other colleges have solved, through research, have solved the dog genome, and there's definitely evidence that there is an inherited factor there. As far as the surgery, maybe some of you in this audience, besides me, have had a hip replaced. And that work was done on dogs long before it was done on people. And it's now just becoming into the veterinary field simply because of economics. Veterinarians and surgeons worked hand in hand perfecting the technique. And veterinarians are capable of doing the surgery as much as your best orthopod. But price, economics. Now people are spending more money and are willing to do this for their pets. So
Dogs come from wolves. I don't know, I'm just asking, is the derivation of a dog really a wolf back in prehistoric times?
I would assume so, but I'm not a scientist to know for sure. I assume so. I always used to get a kick out of people marching in with their, and in my book I refer to Mr. Macho. They would walk in with this dog that, he's half wolf, Doc. I'm not sure that's true. I don't think so. Yes, ma'am.
I just wondered, what's the status these days of pain control for animals, like that have this major surgery and so on?
Well, in my day, we attempted pain control, but not nearly as effective. And of course, what is happening now is people don't want ears to be cropped, don't want tails to be docked, don't want you to take off extra toes from cats and so forth. And I confess, I did many of those procedures, not the ear cropping, but I did a lot of ear cropping with anesthesia, but tail docking, extra toes, and I still, it's painful, but what about circumcision for males? It's painful, but it's quick and no anesthesia is usually applied and it's over with. And whether it's good or bad, I don't know. I'm not convinced that it's all bad. So, other questions? Yes, ma'am.
We have an older cat and she doesn't like going to the vets. Is there any tranquilizer or calming medication that you can give an animal that wouldn't be harmful?
I think the question is that she has an older cat who doesn't like to go to the vet. My granddaughter has a cat that is Casper milk toast at home, and he is the worst lion, tiger, incorrigible creature in the veterinary hospital. So I have to take him. But we sometimes give a product very effective in cats as a tranquilizer, acepromazine, to give it before the visit, an hour or two before. You might ask your veterinarian about that and see if he would go along with acepromazine or another tranquilizer just to calm the poor creature's fears.
I think it was bad for anyone in the waiting room listening to what was going to happen with their animal.
Oh, well. Any more? One more?
Question about pit bulls.
Okay.
I read a book one time and it said that the pit bull, there's something genetic in it, that the dog can be fine when it's younger, it can just turn on you for no reason at all. What's your experience?
I don't have too much experience with pit bulls, but I don't believe that they are naturally nasty or aggressive. There's a young lady who has worked in our animal hospital for 20 years when I was active and 15 since as an animal health technician, and she raises pit bulls. And they're the most gentle creatures. And I think you can train them. And when you train them to be mean and vicious and fighting, wow, there's nothing like them. But you can also train Dobermans as watchdogs. But Dobermans have the worst press in the world. They are gentle dogs if you treat them and train them to be gentle. You know, it's just, I don't want to give the Dobermans or the pit bulls a blanket condemnation. I don't think they deserve it. There's a lot of blurbs in our journals of municipalities banning pit bulls, banning Dobermans, and that doesn't work. And I don't think that should be. But when they are trained to be vicious, they are terrible. More questions? More questions? All right, then you're all dismissed.